Hi guys. Hi Brew Crew. Okay, so I'm Tanda. You guys can see my screen, right? I'm just gonna play a video of introduction.
I'm a sculptor. I'm producing work that right now is meant for the public view. So far I've been presenting large African heads. So I do it because I like to see it. I want to see it out there. There's so much going on as far as emotion, as far as telling a story just by showing the face of a person. This piece is a large scale head that is actually sipping water, but most of the emotional center is in the eyes, in the portraiture. The last piece that I worked on, this really big 10-foot head that was being suspended in the air, and as it was being installed, something happened where the strap snapped. The piece fell, cracked. No one got hurt. It was really shocking even to see how I reacted to it. I kind of was really calm, and the piece was called Everyone Breaks. So I immediately saw the connection. I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have the balls to actually drop something that took so much work and energy and honestly money to produce. To be happy with something that could have been possibly tragic is something that is so unexpected.
Okay, as I mentioned, I do public sculpture, and I have basically a stage, because this public sculpture actually sets the stage to our life when we're in the public space. So as you can see, all these images are recent images of Black Lives Matter uprising due to the last straw, being George Floyd's death by the hands of the cops. And as you can see, these people are there. There's an interaction between the public sculpture and the public, and what you put out there as a sculptor actually interacts with the public and actually lends an energy to the space. And with that said, a lot of the things that are going on now a lot of it is because of what's going on with the white supremacy that's going on in the government systematically. And in this image, you can see the entire image, right? Okay, in this image, you can see, this is what you typically are going to get traditionally from public sculpture images with Black people versus white people. That's the sort of dynamic. If we are at all visible, this is the dynamic that you see. This depicts President Lincoln freeing the slaves, just waving his arm, and magically breaks the chains of this African American who's on his knees. Or you'll have people who have a really diabolical past, like Dr. J. Marin, who is actually the father of modern gynecology. This sculpture was, up until 2 years ago, on Fifth Avenue, I believe, Fifth Avenue in Central Park, by Central Park. And this guy, the reason why his presence there was controversial is because he made a career on the torture of the people who were enslaved. He performed surgeries and experiments on them without any kind of anesthesia, even though anesthesia was available. But he needed to understand what was going on by feeling that knowing that people were, they had that visceral reaction to pain. So I guess he felt like either he was, like the pain, or it found some kind of function to it. But in the end, it was very completely unethical, and called for, people called for the removal of it 2 years ago. Finally, it actually took 8 years, and it eventually was removed. So can you imagine, these sculptures actually lend energy to the spaces that we exist in the public space, and the feeling of it. You might see this man, dressed really nice in this polished bronze, but the feeling of it to people who know and who it matters to is a more accurate depiction of what's going on. And you imagine there's several sculptures around the world that kind of have the same kind of feeling. I just got this sculpture of this demonic character, which actually exists out there. There's a story behind it, but I won't get into it. And what happens is eventually people get a voice or eventually people let their voice be heard, or eventually people, you know, have a platform for their voices to be heard as well, and then something has to change. And a lot of the issues that we're having in the country again today is that there's like a lot of lies. I have something written here, but I guess I can't see it in my screen here, but I'll read it here. Tall tales, the danger of sweeping dirt under the flag. In the US, we'd rather teach our children tall tales of honest presidents chopping down cherry trees instead of our real history. So that when you try to have a conversation about how we've arrived where we are today, it's like discussing spirituality with people who still believe in the Easter Bunny. It's exactly like that. I've had that experience. I've been like, since recently with the Black Lives Matter uprising, since then, it's like I've been trying to speak to people and so the side who actually are putting down the movement due to all the confusion, the intentional confusion around what's the chaos of it. It's by design. They're able to look down on the people who are actually saying this isn't right, and say, you know, mix it up with everything else and say that they're actually causing destruction. So there's a lot that's going on, and it's a lot of it is the fact that we're existing in two different universes of information with fact and fiction. So this is the imagery or the feeling that you're going to get here with Columbus, of course, discovering, quote, America, where, you know, fully populated America, which he never actually stepped foot on. He just stayed in the Caribbean, and just a bunch of rape and selling of people, children and adults as slaves for sex, mutilation to intimidate. He enslaved thousands, and a lot of the indigenous people decided to kill themselves. Like there's a record of 50,000 people who killed themselves rather than be able, you know, to just live to collect gold and forget about their family, but collect gold for Columbus. You know, that was their new way that was their life. So they decided to leave it. So again, this is in Central Park right now. This is Columbus. This piece is in Central Park, in Columbus Circle right now, you know, it's very populated, and this is the history. It's probably actually at this point, it's good that he's up there very high, but that's another point. And I just threw this in as well, because also just imagine if you are the people whose land this was, and these people who took the land dishonestly just blew their faces in the side of the mountain. It might feel a little bit more like this is the depiction, this is the feeling that they are getting as well. So there's also an underlying story that led us to where we are today. And a lot of it is connected to the fact of how we were here, how were the Africans brought here to this country. So there's like alternate truths that are creating alternate realities. Like there's people who would die because they really believe in their cause. There's people who would die to protect their family from being harassed or over policed, basically, to the point where they would die on the streets anyway. So there are people who would protect that protect that, because that's just the right way. The police are overprotecting the society who they're supposed to be protecting. And the history is, as you can see here, is the police itself was invented in the United States here in the 1700s to police slave. So they were actually a slave patrol, as you can see in that image. So that same exact police department exists today, and they're in our communities, and I've seen it. And I grew up in the suburbs. I also lived in the city. I lived all around the world, and I've seen that when things aren't right. So truth of the matter is, Black and brown people are being over policed, and a lot of us are kind of frustrated about that, because besides the fact that that is happening, but it seems that people don't realize it's happening. And it's like being in an alternate universe, like the Twilight Zone, because people don't seem to know that the same thing that we've known for all of our lives. So, and a lot of that is on the other side, there's a deferring story. Like For instance, there's a few organizations that are made it a point to put up public sculptures to kind of change the history of what has happened in the past. Like in this, as you can see, I have Robert E. Lee, who was a Confederate general, and he's been put up and as like a god. And when you have this image that in your head, for you, he is godlike, and you would probably in your heart believe that you should defend him as he's your, godlike individual. So, so you have the sons of Confederate veterans who are changing the stories, and you have also famously the United Daughters of the Confederacy, who put several monuments to the Confederacy to basically change the story. Like there is a story now, this lost cause. I don't even want to go into it too much, but the fact of the matter is they're saying that the Civil War was fought for states' rights and not for slavery. But I actually have to edit my slides a little bit, but I have an image of like tons of money with slaves on it. So that shows their priority. It shows your priority when you put up statues in a certain light, and it also shows your priority when you put certain things on your money. And your money is saying that you're fighting for slavery. So there are good people on the other side who are saying that certain things, and it's causing a lot of like conflict in the country because there's two different universes, one of truths and one of alternate truths. And when enough is enough, when you've quietly knelt with respect to get attention, and the story is flipped and changed to the point where no one listens, then the public will let you know. And as you can see here, that same sculpture of Robert E. Lee has been taken over by the people who are trying to get through to the powers that be that it's just not right. Like this change has to come now, and it's time because everybody's waking up to it, but there's still people who are not getting the message. So I'm glad to be able to talk about it, and I'm glad to be able to do the work that I do. And again, all around the world, there's these sculptures like of this one of King Leopold. Oh, I don't have some image of this. It's pretty gruesome, so maybe it's better I don't put it in. He in the Congo, he cut off arms of people, the arms of people, just for shits and giggles, really, and to also show control. There's children with their arms cut off. Several. That was his thing. He collected arms, and he murdered and enslaved people. And he had several sculptures around the world. And this one, I believe the one on the right is in Bristol. This actually is of the same sculpture, different images in Bristol. All around the world, he has sculptures showing himself as this amazing general, and it's got to stop. It's a lie. I mean, there's he had enough money, I'm sure, to get all these sculptures up, but there's a cost. More sculptures around the world being taken down. And meanwhile in Brooklyn, here I am, fighting the good fight, making great love-filled sculptures for the world. It's me in my studio, this studio here, working. My goal is to make a bold imprint of the African presence as divine and monumental into the landscapes of our daily lives. Flip the switch, flip the script, change it up a little bit. This is my major inspiration. These are the Ife heads of Benin. Really beautiful sculptures that were created in the 1300s. Long time ago, technologically advanced, amazing, beautiful, spiritually charged pieces that were actually made. All these pieces are about the size of a little bit smaller than life, and they were made in order for a ceremony to honor a person of spiritual importance, or a royal person, and that was one and the same, really. And they're just gorgeous. These also all show that there's those lines, those striations, those lines that you see going on the faces. Those are actually depicting what they had in real life, which was scarification, or tribal marks to show where they were from. So these, in this case, Ife, these are their tribal markings. And it's just, I just think it's beautiful, and it's been inspiring me for a while now. And this is my first public sculpture that I made. It was like 4 years ago. And at the time I wasn't necessarily just making figurative work, but when I got this site, I decided I had to go. This site, by the way, this is in Riverside Park in front of Trump Place, right before Trump was, during the elections, right before he was elected. I got this site and I was like, oh, I have to do big old African heads. Like I had to make it big, and I had to make that impact. It just felt right. It felt like I had to do it. So thanks, Trump. But that was Everyone Breaks. And the inspiration for that was Ife heads, and also, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, Japanese word, kinzen-kuri, which is basically means like when you break something and you can bring it back together in a more beautiful way than it was before it was broken. And like as if in the saying, the world, I don't have it in front of me, but it's been a while since I said it, but the world breaks everyone. The important part is how you are healed. More in that vein. And I just continue to work on consecutive years. It's like big, large scale projects for public space. This one on the left is of Biggie Smalls. For Biggie Smalls, it's Biggie. And I didn't have a place to put it. I still actually technically don't, besides the fact that it's now at Medgar Evers. I didn't have a public place to put it, but I just had a desire to do it. No budget, not even a model. I just started with the large head. And just went in and found random spaces. I wish I could find the pictures I have of me in 8,000 square foot of space that I happened to find that made me able to be able to finish these pieces. And eventually this is in my studio, just to demold the final piece, this is not concrete. It's actually, you can lift it up as one single person, a lightweight alkyl resin. And on the right is kind of a point in my process where I decide to analyze how a piece is, what the important features of the piece is, and how I would be able to change that information into something that can be scaled up, and something that can potentially, and in some cases it did, hold 5,000 pounds of clay. So that's that. This is the piece that was recently in Socrates Sculpture Park 2 years ago. And this is a moment of me working on it from the every day, covering the piece to keep it moisturized, because I was working in water-based clay. That was just the budget and the situation that I was working with. And I was working in an outside space. So I had to cover it up every day. It took sometimes an hour, climb on top of the thing, climb inside of it, close it up and get it going. And eventually you can see on the right, there's me in front of it when with the layers, the final layers of silicone. Actually, I use rubber in this case so that I can reproduce the final concrete image. This is a bunch of stages all in one, just to show you an example of a process from, I don't have the original sketch here, but I do have a sketch of what the internal structure might need to look like in order to make this work, in order to make hundreds of pounds be held up in a center axis and exist outside in wind-blown New York City. So above, there's a bottom image of a model, and that model is what I used. It's the same exact, there's a full model where you can see the three heads together. And then off to the far right, there's a model that I used to look at in order to reproduce what the smaller model needed to show. Hopefully that came out clearly. And again, if anything, if you guys have any questions, just let me know at the end. And this is just me in front of that same piece as I'm like this, taking pictures and checking it against myself. It was based on me. It was actually not totally based on me. It was based on my alter ego. And so I actually called it alter ego because it was also in this piece that I kept in my altar. So alternate ego, alter ego. So, I wouldn't say it's me totally, but in the end, it doesn't matter as much, because in the end, what I'm saying is that someone who looks like me would be out there represented as like a deity, like a god, and not as a regular person, not anything special besides being that, humanity and who we are is that special enough to be able to have this kind of monumental presentation. And here's the final piece in Fort Greene Park. I have this, by the way. This kind of gives you an idea what the internal structure was, but these metal, this would represent rebar, and that rebar was facing the center axis here. So that just gives you an idea. This structure always has to happen in the public space, because people jump on things, people stand on top of things and do stupid things when they're drunk. So it has to be architecturally sound, and you have that in this piece and the pieces that I've done. Sorry, there's sound here. I wasn't sure how to turn it off, but.
Everything's gonna feel really.
And this is going back to the piece that was at Socrates Sculpture Park. I'm bringing it back again to show some of the process, because in this case, the process was interesting because it was out in the public space. The only way I can afford doing this project in the budget that we had for this park, which is like, it's even impossible to what I did here to be able to get this done, but had to cut costs, and one cost was having transported from another site. So I ended up doing the entire project after the model, right there at Socrates Sculpture Park. And this is an example of how I was working. Like that, the orange seat was, where I would sit to observe what's going on with the piece and the sculpture, and then walk all the way over and make the changes that I needed to make. And there was actually space inside. This piece is not solid. It's basically a house-like structure on the inside that holds up all that clay. And I go inside in order to to be able to even work on the pieces that are the forms that are outside, to make sure the clay stays on, it doesn't fall off the face and get dry and crumble. And on the right, you can see me using my smaller model to figure out lighting and placement. And here on the right, that's just a moment with that, one of those moments like when you're doing something that takes a lot of energy and just like you're at your end, the last breath of energy. This is like 4 a.m, and this bird came out of nowhere. This bird in the rafters in the very top. He was just there watching. Then he came down and just sat beside me while I was working, which is like interesting. And then he came back later on. I don't have a picture of it, but he came back later on, and he just for a long time stood on top of the head. And that was like, okay, we can do this. We can get through this. It was very, very hard experience to be able to do large scale work. Is very expensive. And when you're doing that without money, it's like you become, it's like self-exploitation a little bit. It's an investment, but also like my husband in there, he worked his ass off with me to be able to meet this crazy ass deadline with a crazy ass budget. You can see that picture on the right. That's getting some work done. I believe on the last, oh my gosh, this is like towards the very end of the process. I mean, we were sleeping inside the head. I mean, think about that. To get this project done, it had to be, you know, days without sleeping. There's one time I didn't sleep for a few days. And here's it being installed. And these guys helped out a whole lot because it had to be installed, and especially because of some, you know, when you're working at Socrates, the piece is flavored by the conditions you're working with in Socrates. And, you know, this is a emerging artist park. And so if I'm doing a piece like this, this is normally out of range. And these angels helped me be able to install that head. And they were available for all the other artists in the park, but they, you know, this piece had, you know, there was an extra mile that had to be traveled with this. Mark DeStrubio's team helped out with this and really pushed for it to be installed. And this is just me again. I'm just showing this image because it's like I really was like working on a stage. And this is after the piece is already, you know, concrete is being poured. You get left with the clay that is just sitting up there drying, and it cracks, and it just cracks beautifully. If I had the budget, I would probably have casted another piece like this. Beautiful cracks that say even more about the piece. But yeah, that's just the process. The whole process was on display. I think you guys, I mean, normally this process isn't visible, and for it to be visible in this way, it just doesn't happen. So I don't know if anybody's here who has seen me in the park working or seen any of the artists there. I would definitely check out Socrates Sculpture Park. And this is, hopefully it's not out of order, but it's here for a reason, just to show you a little bit of how I had to plan. This is my design skills always helping me because to be able to do the architectural drawings that everyone has to sign off on, the parks department and architecture, I mean the engineers, you need to show them your plan. And this is a page of my plan in order to get the piece done. This is actually the original design. And again, with this park and how you have to produce, you know, it was a very ambitious piece for this park, and to be able to produce it, I made some alterations, and thank God I did, because I would have hidden the face. You know, so you edit, you move along, and you kind of go with the punches, and it became a beautiful thing. Let's play. It's me working on that piece. I love this song. So you can see in the front of the piece, the clay is softer. In the back, I had to abandon the clay because of it. We went through like heat waves and like lots of time to be able to get this piece done. Well, honestly, it's not a lot of time for this kind of scale and this kind of piece. But the piece in the front had to be able to be malleable. So we had, you know, there's a whole bunch of clay, wet clay here for a long period of time, which is great. And the back I had to just abandon and use plaster, which actually was a good move, because in the end I used that back part. It ended up being in the final piece, and I didn't have to go through the stage of casting it. But it was casted, it was thankfully again moved and installed as a final piece. Oh, here we go. We go this way. Here it is again. I love this. I love this rough image because all of this shows the life of and the process of the piece. It did smooth out for valid reasons, but it's just at every stage I'm just enjoying, like, even though it's really hard, this is my favorite stage, where I'm just in it wet with the wet clay and sculpting. And this is the final piece, and people loved it. They kissed it, and they all kinds of things. They just, no one climbed it, which is great. And I don't know why I decided with the piece was already is ambitious enough, but actually that pond was not there before. That was a part of my design. So that had to be, dug and created along with all the other stages that had to be done to get this piece to be done. Right now, the two models of Everyone Take Me With You, which is this Paula piece here, and Adorn Me are at Museum of Art and Design right now. What's next? I'll tell you what's next. It's funny you asked. I will just play. Before it starts, I'm just, this piece is a part, what I envision in the future to be a series of pieces dedicated to people of the African diaspora who otherwise in a just world would be honored and be displayed in the grand forum for the public to see. And this is how I see this around the world. This is one image that I would like to see out there. And this is, you're going to see later on that she has these bits on her head, which for me represents ancestors, and also they're eventually going to be actual heads. I don't want to actually say too much about it, but this is basically a sketch of what I want to do and what I see this happening, of the story of we being a story that is told around the world. And this story that you're gonna hear me describe also, it expresses the presence of something that is big. And this story of we is this person or a character who has added to the life of this country, inspiring the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence to realize that, oh, all men are created equal, even though they weren't given that acknowledgement by laws or by policies. This character, this person, helped them to realize that the equality of people, of the ideal that this country, that brought so many people to this country and so much energy of progress and cultural sharing and cultural appreciation. But we'd never really seen this person in the light that she hopefully eventually will be seen. And with that, the story of we.
I'd like to tell you the story of we. We represents a bold truth hidden in plain sight. A story of many of us and one of us forgotten in time. We represents the one who's devoted this life to the fight for freedom and to wake the captors to the realization our humanity and our inalienable rights to freedom. You represent the union of the past, present, and the uncertain future, which at least guarantees her presence is divine. She stands fierce with the marks of her movements, and know it or not, what she exudes is her divine. There she is, a life lived with her interior veiled, separated from home, her earth, distant from her origins, Africa removed from the African. Words scribed on her surface, The use of words alone for so many is defiance of the law. Criminal script. Not meant to know we are free. Beyond her black patina is something deeper. She could see it, black, even with her eyes closed. Something so black, it seeps out, black as ink. We stain your letters black. We stain your pages with this truth. Big, black, and evident in your words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We made you know this, yet you disregard the humanity of the people breaking themselves to build the tall stories you tell of the American dream. But we are here, black and crude as oil, big and black and beautiful as the blood of this earth. The story of we.
The unrest we are all witnessing today is symbolic of our collective shift in the tolerance of oppression. Evil may always exist, but when more of us realize the strength of our collective voices, we will always keep it in check. So, questions? That's everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This was really amazing. Actually, there is a lot that's going on in the chat right now. Guys, if you want, write your question, the Q&A chat, so it's easier to manage that. And thank you, Tanda. This is like great to, I think it is important to understand history, where you're coming from and what you're doing, and also knowing you a bit. You literally had that big transformation in your life, going from like graphic design and digital to like sculpture. It's like, it's an evolving path.
Yeah.
So let me go back to the chat and the Q&A. So we have a question from Amy. How long does a piece that size usually take you to finish?
That's a really good question. That's a very common question at the same time, still really great. I mentioned in the, when just presenting the other pieces, that I usually don't have enough time. I mean, ideally you have like a year to finish something like that, but I've had, you know, in different stages, it more or less has three stages, and I've had a month per stage. And that large piece had to be done in a month. The one, basically, more or less all of them. It's just the way, it's just I push the budget and the boundaries of what I can do with the budget in order, with what I have available to me, in order to get what I ultimately wanted out of the piece. And that's, so you can do it in 3 months. I wouldn't recommend it. I just wouldn't recommend it. Just don't do it to yourself. Trust me. But
you mentioned 3 phases to do the sculpture. What are these 3 phases?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good question too. It's good questions coming. So the first would be, you know, get the idea. It's the idea, first of all, which you usually get across in a small maquette. And not everybody does a maquette, but I personally like to do it. Again, you can see I did it earlier. I showed you earlier that I'd use my small maquette to take outside and see the shadows, so I can see what was going on in the piece and what it would look like in a certain location. You can do that with a maquette. And then you get then you do a larger piece, so that you can actually get all the structural information that you need in order to enlarge to the final stage, which is the final piece. And I guess you can add another stage to that, because that involves, depending on what you're doing, what material, but I've been doing casting in concrete. So that final stage also involves doing a mold and casting in concrete.
Great. You actually have some compliments. They're not really question, but few people said fantastic, beautiful work, absolutely amazing. This is powerful work. So one more question. So you said, someone asked, what is your favorite material to work on?
Oh, okay. You guys can see that I use a lot of concrete, not because it's my favorite material, but it's the most practical at such a large scale. As far as the material, the final material, that is my go-to for now with the budget that I have. Depending, I've also done projections for bronze as well. So talking about final material, those bronze at this scale is my ideal. As far as what I like to use, my hands to create a model and a form, I love working with clay. I've worked with clay at a large scale, which I really love working with water-based clay, but at a large scale, it's almost impossible. I did it, but it's really difficult to keep it dry, keep it wet, keep it malleable and really nice to feel to the touch, and to be able to get the forms you want. My favorite clay that I'm using now, because I had to switch to be able to use it in my home studio. If you work with water-based clay that size, that's going to definitely make the air toxic. So since the last large-scale piece, I've been using monumental clay, which is this clay. I don't know how I can show it to you. It's actually right here. I have a model here. I use it for my as a kind of stage as well, which I've started to do recently for practicality, because I have a baby, and this right here was originally going to be done in concrete, and I couldn't pour concrete because my baby was right in my lap, so I decided to use clay. So it's just, you can use this type of clay. It's by Chavant. You can use this type of clay for anything. It's a hard. I have the soft version, which is really hard anyway, and you can use it for small pieces, as well as for. Let me see if I can show you. Hold on.
Guys, I wish you could see actually where Tanda is now, because she has a beautiful loft, which is also her studio, so she lives and works there. So I wish we could do like a tour of your loft, so actually people can see where you work and material. It's pretty cool.
Maybe I can do that. See, now there's a baby garden here now. That's a mama life.
Hey.
My husband is also a sculptor, so this is basically my section here. And if it was, I don't know if you guys remember those reruns, those Laverne and Shirley, where they had a line down the middle. They would have a line down. Well, it's an imaginary line because we don't need tape. But line down the middle. My side and my husband's side got taken over by it's now my son's side. So it's like a little play area. That's a piano that I never play. I used to use it in my work here and there, like, because I used to do digital work, and did some things online where it needed sound, and this was helpful. Now it's just like once in a while I'll have people who really play it really well. Now my son's playing it, so that's real cool. Toy collection, mostly my husband. That's My husband worked Diego Anaya. That's my work. That's a combination. His work.
Well, Tanda, we have a lot of questions.
Yes,
Yeah, so I want to give voice to our attendees because I know we can talk for hours with you because this stuff is really interesting. Other than the Med Museum, where could we see your pieces in New York? I think also, guys, if you check the bio and our website, we list a few places. So there are many public space and park where actually you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Wanna answer?
So right now, actually Adorn Me right now is in New Jersey, right over the water, like not too far from the financial district, just across the water in New Jersey at the Colgate building, you know, the Colgate building by the Colgate clock. They currently have that on their property. And it's like really quick to get over there if you guys want to visit from New York or already in New Jersey. I have another piece that's in New Jersey, which is, it's on a private property. The piece, Take Me With You, Alicia Keys and Swizz Beatz have that in there in New Jersey, but it's definitely private. And there's another that Everyone Breaks is on public land, and I don't think it's set up properly. I hear that it could be set up in a better way. It's in the Florida Keys. So Everyone Breaks is in Florida Keys. Adorn Me is in by the Colgate building, and then the other large scale piece is in private. It's only for a private viewing, and the Biggie sculpture is at Medgar Evers, but I think I have to do some do some repairs on it. But as far as those public pieces, they all have a home, which is actually not the easiest thing to do. When you have a large scale piece, it's a lot to move. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars just to move. It's a lot of effort just to do it. I think people don't realize how much effort goes into just doing one piece. It's a huge challenge, and it's so many different meticulous stages that go into it. So I'm blessed to be able to have all them in the world, because a lot of times these pieces get destroyed, and they get destroyed because they're it's a shame, but it's true. And I haven't destroyed a piece yet.
That's good. We have actually, I don't know your name, but we have someone that connect from Nigeria, and he said, every artist must understand the language of the street. Do you have any concern about those who visit your art in the public space? Love from Nigeria.
Thank you. I'm feeling that love, Nigeria. What do you? I'm curious if you meant what you mean by concern, but you mean by if possible vandalism. Yeah, I have. I don't ever really have that concern, because I make the piece as strong as it can be in the public space. So if you're going to really try to harm it, you're going to be trying hard. And if you do try hard, I actually am. I go out, and so far I've been the one, especially with the first pieces. I mean, I have to be the one to go out and take care of it. The first piece that was in front of Trump Place, that was vandalized. Actually, not too long after the elections, after he won. Some people were like, "Oh, it must be connected." I don't think so, but it's possible. But the fact of the matter is, someone threw blue paint. No statement or anything. They just threw blue paint. You can see that on my Instagram at Tanda Francis. Just threw blue paint on the piece, like lazy ass vandalism. I mean, at least you can be creative with it, but don't. But it was just something that I had to take care of, and it was done in the dead of winter. Man, it was cold, and I had to take my glove, go out there and learn how to get this material separated without damaging the sculpture. And it was definitely a learning experience. Thank you, Vandal. But those things happen, and you take care of it. And that's the only time it happened. The Adorn Me piece, people who are around the park, who worked in the park, they were just like, wow, this piece, I don't know, man, this neighborhood, like they were, you know, I think that, you know, they were just thinking that, you know, something might happen to the piece. And I'm like, I had no fear then. I was just like, I don't think so. And especially the fact that that piece was made to go, and it spoke to the public where it's supposed to. The demographic, it was almost all African American people, and that piece is for us. So, you know, that piece didn't get touched.
He
So
actually, our friend, he wrote back, say he meant with people going against having a face or African like icon that big.
oh, well, that's why I put it there. Again, it wasn't. I put it right there. I could have put it anywhere in the park. That park, you know, you may not know because you're not here, but that park is like Fort Greene Park. Fort Greene itself was like one of the original kind of super gentrified areas in New York City, and there's like people with tons of, you know, resources and money on one side of the park, and the other side of the park is low-income housing and the struggle, you know, basically. So you have that, and then you have the park itself, and that piece needed to go right there because I was speaking to people of African descent, and I needed to show that, like my mission is to show that royalty, that connection. So the idea is clear who I'm speaking to. So it's harder for people to destroy something that they can relate to. So it was like the most amazing experience so far with my public work, because people were like, everything that I said that it would do, every reason that I had for putting it actually right there in that particular spot came true. Meaning that people were talking about the fact that it was African. Like, how did this happen? Like, people were so confused. Like, first of all, we never get anything good on this side. You know, everything goes on the other side of the park. And second of all, how did they let you put something African up? Like, that was the most, like, I got that sentiment, and also actual words, like, and these are all the things that I knew, and it goes on my head because I know the reality of it. So I knew, I expected it, and also I expected this most interesting kind of feedback is when it's also on I wrote a little bit about it on my Instagram, where this group of girls walked up to the piece, and they didn't know I was still installing and I was doing stuff, and they didn't know who I was, that I was connected to the piece at all. Maybe they thought I was just a cleaner cleaning up or whatever. And they were like talking about the piece, and they were like, what, like all of them were like, most of them were like, wow, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And then like two girls, and one in particular was like, I don't know, it's ugly, you know? And then I was like, and then I was like, always brushing myself off, about to be like, okay, this is it. This is time. This is this moment where I know why she thought it was ugly. You know, this big old nose on this sculpture she's not used to seeing in a public space, you know? And she was like, I don't know, the nose, it's so big. And I was like, well, it's big because it's just my nose. and then she was like, oh, you know, this poor little girl, she's like 9 maybe. But at the same time, I was like, look, I'm about to, you know, school, and, you know, blah, 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 classes in session. So I was just like, all right. So, you know, just really telling her, you know, talking about, we had a discussion, all these they're all African Americans. And some of them were saying things like, oh, this is oh, they, you know what, I know people who are pretty even though they have a big nose. And I was like, well, what if they're pretty because they have a big nose? Maybe, you know, it's there's a, you know, balance that happens in the facial features and blah, blah, blah. You're just not used to seeing it. And this is what's going on. This is why I did this sculpture, because you're just not used to seeing certain things in the public space. It doesn't happen. Especially, you know, even 2 years ago, this is unique. These pieces that I'm doing is unique to the space in public, in probably a lot of places.
Thank you. Also, we are live on Facebook, so from James. So I hope you are still online. He said, Tanda, wonderful work. I'm curious if you are hearing different conversation about your work, more open mind, for instance, or changes in how your work is being received in light of more open conversation about race and acknowledgement on heritage over the past few weeks?
Not directed at me, but of course I'm seeing it as the person who does this work, and I already know. I know why this is happening. I know, like I described in the beginning, for me it's clear that there's lack of true communication, and I know why this happened, how we could have ended up in the place where we are today. And we obviously need more of a voice. I mean, African Americans literally built this country. So it's like we're not represented in the public space. We're sort of pushed to certain neighborhoods and certain conditions so that we can be seen in a certain light, which is not natural. So of course this is going to happen in the public space, and where people are going to attack or address issues from the sculptures that are out there. But for me, as far as people coming to me, I mean, there's a couple of things involved in how, if whether or not they're speaking to me. One, it would be quarantine, or everyone's in quarantine, and coupled with my natural lonerisms. Like I'm a very friendly person who has tendencies of being keeping to myself. But for the most part, we haven't, no one, my ideas, or my plan of action kind of switched since George Floyd's murder. Like, it just hit me like a ton of bricks, like a lot of people, that my Instagram, which is where I usually how I usually communicate to in the social environment, social media. My Instagram went from showing my sculptures to just being like a history channel. Like, just trying to cram. I've been trying to figure out how I want to brand it, but it's cram history, like history cram. And then I was doing this work on my own, just sending or communicating with people and saying, okay, this information here might help you. Just short little clips of information that can help you understand how the country is the way it is. And it's all based on fact. You can research this, you can go to the library and get the same information, but this is like, for our culture where we just, everyone is just online, video, get the information. And I kind of switched my focus to that. And incidentally, my sister was also she's in Maryland doing the same exact thing. And she was sharing personal histories, sharing our stories, SOS, which is the Facebook page, sharing our stories. And then before me, I was just trying to get this history stuff off of my regular Instagram, because it started to get like very, heated, the conversation. And then there, it's I needed to make a separation. So I started to do a history page or cram history page on Instagram, and in Facebook. And then I used my regular Tanda Francis on Facebook. And then I realized that my sister was doing this history thing, which is a personal history, and I was doing the overall history. So we're coming together right now and formulating, sharing our stories, or sharing our history. Look at my Instagram to see where I go with that. But it's all this is happening in real time, and along with me, with this AIGA talk, have coming together at the same time to get us here today. What was that? Of course it happened for a reason. Yeah, let's ride it together. Yeah, absolutely. Let's ride it together.
So yeah, guys, we are gonna, if you check on the beginning of the chat, there are Tanda contact, but we also are gonna send them in the recap email. So if you didn't write them down, don't worry, you're gonna be able to do that later. So I have another more question for you, and then I think we are running out of time. Mm-hmm. This is from Andrea, so it's quite long. Let me read it for you. What are your feelings about organization, company, or museum recent scrambling for Black artwork in this exact moment? There has been several Black artists that have been talking stands and writing public letters, etc., against performative support. How can organizations be held accountable for their support of Black artists for the long haul? Would you love to hear your thoughts?
Oh, as far as the fact that it's happening, sure. I mean, it's, we know the realities of people trying to, if they're opportunists or not. We know that that's the reality, but in the end, you know what? We need support. We absolutely need support, and also we tend to not have that support even from the family, not because of a lack of love, but it's for like, okay, for the lack of the love of the struggle, especially immigrant families like my own, like my parents are Jamaican. Their family, my family itself, like they're all like they're in the medical field, doctors, pharmacists, nurse, teacher, they're all like, engine. And that's like this, there's a small few things that people decide that you can do if you don't want to be whatless, if you don't want to be like worthless, because it's not the same. It's not the same for, it's not a level playing field. So, try to get what's yours in the way that we know will work. And then you have, you're going on more of a limb when you're in this situation to become an artist. So yeah, if they're gonna support now, support. This is necessary, especially now.
I have a question for you from Jennifer. Is there a chance that any of the temporary work you have made for New York could be revised for a permanent commission? If you could make a public work anywhere, where would you put it?
Oh. Wow, that's a really good question. I don't have a one place I would absolutely put a piece. So far, my head is always geared towards having a site and having a site and making it work for what I need, and positioning it in the way that is makes it the most impactful. A site where most people are is the most as far as the most people who are trying to reach with the piece is the most impactful. So you get an actual higher number kind of people who are able to experience the piece, for the focus of this piece. Actual place in particular, I have to get back to you on, because I don't have right now in my mind where that would be. But I have I kind of like to go where the spirit takes me, with it, because it usually, lands me where I need to be. And, in this case, we have that story of we, and that needs to be out there more urgently, in my opinion. And the way I considered those pieces being positioned is, say, one portrait, if you want to call it. One portrait would be in honor of George Floyd, close to where George Floyd was murdered, or close to a place that is special to George Floyd, that would honor him in the best way possible. And the same for any of us who've been dishonored in this world. I would want to be able to present us in that beautiful light and of these kind of monumental, amazing sculptures that show who we are.